This is the Dynasty Vipers Vipercast.
Hello and welcome to the Dynasty Vipers Vipercast as we continue our team-by-team spotlight series here, talking about which teams you can trust, not only in the regular season, but for fantasy football purposes. We're going to go through the AFC North this week, and we're going to be talking about the Cincinnati Bengals, the Baltimore Ravens, the Pittsburgh Steelers, and the Cleveland Browns. From studs and duds to depth charts to predicting the future and which teams are going to be making the playoffs and which teams are on the outside looking in. Now, our first stop here in the AFC North, it is going to be in Cincinnati, and we're going to talk about the Cincinnati Bengals, who are coming into 2023 off a 12-4 record the season prior, where they scored 418 points and gave up just 322. That is a points for versus points against differential of plus 96. Their passing offense, it ranks 7th in the league, averaging 257.9 passing yards per game. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, their passing defense was actually their weakness there, ranking 26 after giving up 234.2 passing yards per contest, while the run defense was stellar there, finishing 5th in the league at 103.5 per contest. Now, when we talk about this Bengals team, the Bengals are one of the few teams in the entire National Football League where anything less than a Super Bowl appearance is a little bit of a letdown. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Remember Cincinnati, where you were just a few years ago prior to Joe Burrow coming here? Now when we're talking about not making the Super Bowl as a disappointment, that means you have finally made it. Cincinnati finished the regular season on an 8-game winning streak heading into that AFC wildcard game against a division foe that they had met just the week prior. They took care of the Baltimore Ravens in that Week 18 contest, and they took care of the Ravens again in that AFC wildcard. They advanced to face the Buffalo Bills team, which they were supposed to play in week number 17, but due to the whole Damar Hamlin situation and everything that took place on the field that day, the NFL canceled that contest, which meant that this game was played in Buffalo. Now, good thing for the Cincinnati, they took care of business there in Buffalo and punched their ticket to Kansas City to meet the Kansas City Chiefs, a team that they've had success against in the past. Unfortunately, that success would come to an end as it was this Kansas City Chiefs that would punch their ticket to the Super Bowl with a 23-20 victory. Now, when we look at what the Bengals did this offseason, we have to talk about their draft class, and they went out there and addressed some position of needs. There is going to be some pretty big turnover here, especially on the back end of that Cincinnati Bengals defense heading into 2023. But they did a pretty good job addressing that with a couple of these draft picks, including in the second round there at pick number 60 with a selection of DJ Turner out of Michigan, and then followed that up in the third round, pick 95 with safety Jordan Battle out of the University of Alabama, which was all great because they made a great first-round selection selecting Clemson edge rusher Myles Murphy. They weren't done there. They also went out there in the fourth round and got themselves Charlie Jones, wide receiver out of Purdue, and they went out there in the fifth round and looked after the running back because we know there's kind of situations going on there in Cincinnati at the running back position. I'm talking about you, Joe Mixon, and kind of the transgressions that we're going to talk about a little bit later. They made sure that anything that could come up was going to be taken care of with the selection of Illinois running back Chase Brown. Now, we talk about some of these other moves they made throughout the offseason. You have to talk about the free agency period there where they signed offensive tackle Orlando Brown away from the Kansas City Chiefs. They got safety Nick Scott, and they also signed tight end Irv Smith Jr. Now, the losses, look, I mentioned how that back end took a little bit of a hit there. The loss of Jesse Bates, the loss of Von Miller, the loss of Eli Applewell. I mean, I guess really losing Eli Apple's not really that big of a loss, but they also lost running back Samaje Perine and tight end Hayden Hurst. Now, when we look at this, what was the biggest move for them? Obviously, it's going to be the addition of Orlando Brown. Not only does it address a need for the Bengals, and it adds some much-needed protection for Joe Burrow, who was sacked 41 times last season after being sacked 51 times the season prior. Not only does this mean that Brown is going to be protecting Joe Burrow's blind side, but it also means he's not going to be protecting Patrick Mahomes. That's a huge win for the Bengals here moving into 2023. Also, maybe completely unrelated, but not really unrelated, I just can't quit Irv Smith Jr. Now, as far as losses are concerned, maybe the worst move in this whole thing, we know that the Bengals are going to need to pay Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, and eventually Jamar Chase. That's what happens when you have too many good players and not enough money to go around. That also means you're going to lose some good players due to free agency. We talked about Jesse Bates. We talked about Von Bell. We talked about Eli Apple, Samaje Perine, and Hayden Hurst. But the biggest loss in all that is probably going to be Jesse Bates, who hurts this defense the most. Cincinnati, they did go out there and get Nick Scott. Dax Hill looks like he could be ready to anchor that back end, but it's hard to replace the leadership and the production that the Bengals got from Bates. We're talking about 79 games started over the last 5 seasons in which he compiled 479 combined tackles while picking off 14 passes. That's just not something you replace overnight. Now, looking at this depth chart here for the Cincinnati Bengals, we know that they're set at quarterback. This is a team that has all the starters lined up, but the depth is a little bit concerning at times. Joe Burrow there, then you're looking at Trevor Siemian and Jake Browning. At running back, it's still Joe Mixon, Chase Brown, Trevion Williams, and Chris Evans round out that running back room. Wide receiver, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd. And then it gets interesting. Now it becomes Charlie Jones, Trent Irwin, Trent Taylor, Stanley Morgan, not exactly household names. So if any of these wide receivers go down, yes, they're covered. If Higgins go down, Tyler Boyd can step up. Tyler Boyd's going to be able to step up if any of the big names go down. But if you lose 2 wide receivers, then we're going to run into some complications. At tight end, Irv Smith Jr., he's coming in there, filling the void left behind by Hayden Hurst. Then after him, it's Drew Sample and Devin Asiasi. So really little to no depth behind Irv Smith Jr. as well. The offensive line has improved over the last couple seasons. You're looking at Orlando Brown Jr. coming in there at left tackle, Cordell Volstead, Ted Karras, Alex Kappa, and Jonah Williams, who we've heard rumored to be on the trade block. So they have Lel Collins kind of there and Jackson Carman all kind of sitting there at that right tackle spot. And they also added Cody Ford via free agency. Now on defense, they feel like they are a little bit better there. Sam Hubbard, DJ Reader, BJ Hill, Trey Hendrickson on that front with Miles Murphy, Josh Tupou, Zach Carter, and Joseph Ossie there as their backups to the starters along that defensive front. At linebacker, Logan Wilson, Jermaine Pratt, Akeem Davis, Gaither there. And then you got like Jalen Moody, Marcus Bailey, and Joe Bacci. Not exactly household names there either because they have to try and find a way to pinch a few pennies just to fill out this roster. Awazi, Nick Scott, Dax Hill, and Cam Taylor-Bright rounded the secondary, which is considerably weaker than it had been in the previous season. Now, heading back into what we all look at here, camp battles. What camp battles do we need to be paying attention to when it comes to the Cincinnati Bengals offense? And more than likely, we know that money talks, and this could be Tyler Boyd's last chance to earn himself some real money heading into next season. The probability of him remaining as a Bengal after the season is very unlikely. So he'll be looking to use this season as an audition of sorts for potential opportunities elsewhere. That said, the Bengals, they may just take this opportunity to see what they have in Charlie Jones, who is coming off a 110 reception season there in which he accumulated 1,361 yards and also caught 12 passes at Purdue. Now, what needs to happen for this Bengals team in 2023? The Bengals need to get past the Chiefs. There are some heavyweights in that AFC, especially when you compare it to the NFC. You've got the Bills, you've got the Ravens, you've got the Chiefs all kind of standing there. You got the Chargers. I mean, there's so many good teams in that AFC, but the Chiefs are the Bengals' main competition. Then again, getting past the Chiefs is easier said than done, especially when we look at the losses in that secondary. Can Nick Scott, Dax Hill, Cam Taylor-Britt, can they fill that void left behind by Bates, Bell, and Eli Apple? Cincinnati, they also added Jordan Battle and DJ Turner in the draft, which gives them some flexibility and some much needed depth on that back end. One area that you definitely don't have to worry about is in the slot there where Mike Hilton, he's got that down on lockdown. What do I see for the Cincinnati Bengals here in 2023? I see them having another strong campaign here, and I think 13-4 is a very realistic prediction when we're looking at their record. Now, as far as fantasy is concerned, look, the top 5 fantasy assets that the Bengals have are pretty straightforward here. Starting at number 1, Joe Burrow. We all know what Joe Burrow can do. 35 touchdowns last season, 4,475 passing yards, and arguably the best wide receiver duo in the league in Jamar Chase and T. Higgins at his disposal. Burrow will always have a seat at the table inside the top 5 when it comes to fantasy quarterbacks. Number 2, Jamar Chase. Chase led the league with over 11 targets per game, and that's while sharing the field with T. Higgins, who also saw 108 targets per season. I mean, we're looking at, if you want consistency, T. Higgins has basically got like 108, 110, 109 as far as targets concerned the last 3 seasons. In 28 games with Burrow, Chase has 22 touchdowns, 2,475 yards, and 166 receptions. Could Chase be the first receiver in NFL history with over 2,000 yards receiving in a single season in 2023? We'll see. Now, T. Higgins, he's the number 3 asset when we talk about fantasy here. Whatever Chase can do, Higgins can do as well. Look, Chase and Higgins have been on the field at the same time on the same routes 849 times in their careers. On those routes, the targets are 184 to 179 for Chase. The fantasy points in PPR are 382 to 360 for Chase. The air yards, 2,055 to 2,053, again, in favor of Chase, but that's how close these two are. Number 4, Joe Mixon. Off the field transgressions have lowered Mixon's ADP, but looking back at 2022 after a slow start, Mixon was 6th in red zone touches there in the National Football League. He would also finish with the 6th most receiving yards among the running back position, after his best receiving season of his career, hauling in 60 of 75 targets for 441 yards. Now, finally, the last one, because like I said, I can't quit Irv Smith, but I am following the money when it comes to the Bengals tight end. CJ Uzomah, he got paid after his time with Burrow and the Bengals. Hayden Hurst came in and he got the bag from the Panthers after just one season in Cincinnati. The law of averages here would suggest it's finally going to happen for my man, Irv Smith Jr. When we look at the player that you definitely need to add to your roster, look, I'm not even going to sugarcoat this. We all know that Jamar Chase is the player you need. Now, I would take Chase, Cooper Kupp, and even Justin Jefferson there in redraft leagues over pretty much any running back, maybe outside of Christian McCaffrey. And even at then, I'm probably looking at all 3 of those wide receivers being 1, 2, and 3 in redraft. In just 12 games, Chase had 87 receptions, 134 targets, and over 1,000 yards. That's 87 yards per contest. It's going to be fun to watch Kupp, Jefferson, and Chase all chase that milestone of 2,000 yards receiving in 2023. Joe Mixon has the biggest bust potential in this offense. I'm not sure if he's going to see the same volume in the passing game that he did in 2023. Mixon finished the season strong, registering double-digit fantasy production in 3 of the final 4 contests, and he was RB12 when the dust all settled in PPR scoring. That said, those final numbers, they are heavily padded by a Week 9 contest against the Carolina Panthers in which he had 5 touchdowns. Prior to that contest, Mixon was averaging 3.3 yards per carry and was actually getting outplayed by Samaje Perine. The best fantasy value here on the Bengals, T. Higgins. The numbers don't lie. If you miss out on Chase, don't worry. Higgins is a solid consolation prize. And I'm not even thinking that's even worth the word consolation because, like I said, he is just as good as what Chase has done as far as production is concerned. Higgins is going a round or so later than what Chase is typically going for. Maybe the back end of the second, early in the 3rd round if you're lucky. And he's going in that wide receiver 12 to wide receiver 14 range. And he could really challenge the top 5 wide receivers this season when it comes to fantasy. And finally, fantasy sleepers, we all love to dig deep, and I'm not going to dig any deeper than Irv Smith Jr. Look, the tight end position, it is always an absolute crapshoot. I get it. If you're out, you've been hurt before, and so have I, but I am ready to love Irv Smith Jr. once again. I'm not crazy about Smith, but I do like how Burrow and the Bengals have created opportunity for those before him. In 2021, we mentioned CJ Uzomah. He saw 63 targets, converting that into 493 yards. And then he converted that into 3 years at $24 million from the New York Jets. Then in 2022, it was Hayden Hurst who used his time with the Bengals to secure a 3-year, $21.75 million deal with the Cincinnati Bengals after Burrow targeted him on 68 occasions, resulting in 414 yards. So when we look at this Bengals offense, we know that they're going to pass. This is a passing offense. And if I want good players on fantasy, I want good players on good teams because that is where the fantasy opportunities present themselves. And the Bengals, they have plenty of firepower here for fantasy.